Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunya Bhadi Pushchatya Desha Harine. So, the verse of the week is chapter 4, text 13. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. In Krishna consciousness, I'll come back to that. In this particular verse, there are two things that are going on here. One is easy to understand, the first, and that is Krishna has created the Varnashram system. Yet he is aloof, he's the non-doer, he is not changed or affected by his creation of Varnashram Dharma. That's easy to understand. The second part of this verse is the part that we have to give a little more emphasis on. We have to explore and investigate a little bit because there's a lot involved in the second part of this verse. And that is the first part, wherein Krishna says he's established Varnashram according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them. In Krishna consciousness, we get lost sometimes in understanding Varnashram. We know that Srila Prabhupada talked about Varnashram a lot in the final 2 or 3 years of his being on the planet. And his specific instruction was that wherever there is a center, there we should establish a Varnashram called college to teach about the principles of Varnashram. Yet there is very much a confusion or misunderstanding, or let's say a limited understanding of Varnashram, which causes confusion or leads to our inability to not only affect Varnashram in ISKCON society, but also to appreciate Varnashram and then to incorporate it into our own lives so that we can move towards Krishna. Let's talk about the purpose of Varnashram. In the purport to this verse, Prabhupada describes and defines the purpose of Varnashram, which is essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, to facilitate the living entities coming to Krishna. In a nutshell, that's the purpose of Varnashram. Clear and simple, as defined by Srila Prabhupada in the purport to this verse. Krishna also describes very clearly the purpose of Varnashram. We have to go to the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. 18th chapter, from 40 to 44. Krishna describes what a Brahmana is and does, what a Kshatriya is and does, what a Vaishya is and does, and what a Shudra is and does, and the qualities and the attributes of all four. In text number 45, Krishna then says that these four social orders are specifically for the living entity to come to perfection. The word Krishna uses, samsiddhim labhate nara. For the nara, the living entity, to come to siddhi, perfection. What's perfection? And this is where we get to the point where our lack of understanding of Varnashram or our limited understanding of Varnashram gets us into a lot of trouble when we talk about applying Varnashram. And some people often say Varnashram is for the Vedic time, it's not for this day and age, it's some social system for a bygone era. Absolute and total pish-tosh. Let's explore this. Krishna says, clearly, black and white, shouting it from the rooftops, Samsiddhim labhate nara. That's the purpose of Varnashram. This is just after he has described what a Brahmin does, the attributes of a Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Right after describing that, he says the purpose, Samsiddhim labhate nara. That's the purpose of these four orders. We haven't got the point. If we go back to the second chapter, we see what Krishna defines as perfection. We see what Krishna defines as worthy of our focus, of our input, of our pursuit. The Varnashram system, we believe, based on our limited understanding, is to facilitate comfort in the material world. That's the belief. In ISKCON, in Krishna consciousness, we believe that the purpose of Varnashram is for us to, or for society to live comfortably. That's not to say that that is not going to happen. It's not to say that that may not be a subsequent or a byproduct of the Varnashram system, certainly. But that's not the purpose of Varnashram. In the second chapter, Krishna said, happiness and distress will come like winter and summer. Krishna is not interested in happiness and distress, not in as much as we should focus on happiness and distress and pursue happiness and distress. The pursuit of comfort is not what Krishna is all about. That he clarifies from the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, and he repeatedly hits that note all the way through it. So this limited understanding that the purpose of Varnashram is to enable society to live in comfort and luxury as a primary purpose of Varnashram is incorrect. That is not the primary purpose of Varnashram. Krishna has never put comfort and happiness as the ultimate goal of life. Nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita has Krishna done this. So if happiness and distress, comfort is not something to which or for which we should endeavor, what is? Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we see Krishna has always said Brahma Bhuta, essentially coming to the level of Brahman. Various terminology Krishna uses, Stita Prajna, Brahma Bhuta, so on and so forth, Brahma Nirvana. But it's essentially coming to the stage of Brahman realization. That's the minimum standard of perfection. We talk about Krishna saying the purpose of Varnashram is some siddhim labhate nara, siddhi, that perfection, the minimum standard of perfection, as defined by Krishna throughout the Bhagavad Gita, has always been described as essentially Brahma Bhuta. That's the minimum. The secret is Krishna Prema. That's the secret of Bhagavad Gita. Right? And Krishna says, one who explains this secret, one who explains the secret of Manmana Bhava Bhakta, that's the secret. One who explains this secret, he is guaranteed, she is guaranteed pure devotional service unto me. So that's the highest definition of samsiddhim labhate nara, perfection, Krishna Prema. But the minimum, at least Brahma Bhuta, not comfort. And this is critically important in understanding Varnashram. The purpose of Varnashram, if we get nothing else from our exploration of Varnashram, we should get this. The purpose of Varnashram is not comfort, primarily for human society. That's not the primary purpose. It is only important in so much as it enables a living entity to come closer to Brahma Bhuta. The purpose of Varnashram is coming to Brahma Bhuta. Now, it's because of this limited understanding of Varnashram that we are unable to see how Varnashram is applicable in our own lives individually, in the lives or in the structure of ISKCON as a society. And we certainly are unable to apply Varnashram to the wider society. Let's focus on understanding Varnashram to the extent where we can at least apply it and see it in effect in our own life. So now we've come to the understanding Varnashram is not about focusing on comfort. Varnashram is about samsiddhim labhate nara. This is further confirmed by the fact when Krishna says, and he tells Arjuna twice, no less, in the 3rd chapter, and then again in the 18th chapter. Krishna tells Arjuna, engage in your activity. Swabhavajam. Engage in the activity born of your nature, according to your guna, according to your qualities. Stay on that path. Do not engage in the dharma, the activities of another. Even though your own path may be faulty, even if our own path may cause discomfort, even if our own path does not provide the material success we may want, Krishna says, follow your path anyway. To follow another's path is dangerous. He says that in chapter 3, and he says the exact same thing in chapter 18. Because by following our path, our Varna, we will become elevated to some siddhi, perfection, at least to Brahmabhuta. So Krishna admonishing Arjuna and us to stick to our Varna, stick to the qualities born of our own nature. His admonishing us to do that is critically important to understand the purposes of Varnashram. The singular, not multiple, the singular purpose of Varnashram. It's not about comfort. We've got to disabuse ourselves of that idea, because that is throwing us off the trail, thinking that if I engage in Varnashram, my life will be easier. It will not. If you follow the principles of Varnashram Dharma, it does not necessarily mean your life is going to be easier. But you will progress towards samsiddhim labhate nara as a living entity. Another problem that arises because of our limited understanding of Varnashram is not knowing how Varnashram applies to ourselves in our own life. Some people say, and I've had this discussion many a time, oh, Mahavishnu, I like to teach, so maybe I'm a Brahmana. I like to, I have this Ishwar Bhav, so I have some managerial ability. So I have the Kshatriya nature, so actually I'm a Kshatriya, but I also want to, earn money. And I have this wonderful, this quite intense, this very, I'm very expert in the musical field as well. So I'm trying to understand my Varna. That's a problem. And I hear many descriptions of this nature, and I'm thinking, you've missed it. You've missed the point. And I tried to help them, as I was helped, understand how to see Varnashram and apply it in our own lives for the benefit of my own life, not to make my life easier, but to make my life successful in terms of defining my life as Krishna defines Varnashram. Is my life moving me towards samsiddhim labhate nara, towards siddhi, or towards Krishna prema? As I'm a Vaishnava, that's what I'm aiming for. There's a circle, this inner circle. This is the responsibility, the circle of responsibility, let's say. Now, taking the definition that Krishna has given, that the purpose of Varnasrama is to achieve perfection. That's the purpose of Varnasrama. Now let's look at the Varnas. Ashrams are fairly easy. Let's look at the Varnas. That's always the question. It's always where the confusion comes, the limited understanding. So the purpose of Varnasrama is to achieve perfection. Let's look at the Varnas. The Shudra. The Shudra is, the problem is we think these are about occupations. That's where the confusion comes. We try to determine, oh, I like this occupation, maybe I'm a Brahmana. I like that occupation, maybe I'm a Shudra. And of course, we have this unfortunate idea that Shudras are the dregs of society. That is a total, absolute misunderstanding. If the world today was run by qualified Shudras, we would today be living in heaven on earth if the world were run by Shudras. My presentation on Varnasrama, I'm going to put the presentation together. Oh, wow, that was 15 years ago. I am that old. Presentation on Varnasrama, and I've shared it in my travels in many temples about sharing about Varnasrama. My limited understanding, anyway. If you take the attributes of a Brahmana, put them in a column, the attributes of a Shudra, put them in a column. These are the attributes, by the way, given by Narad Muni in the 7th canto of Bhagavad Gita. So these attributes and qualities given by Narad Muni, Brahmana, qualities and attributes in one column, Shudra, qualities and attributes in another column, and you remove from the Brahminical attributes, if you remove what was in that column, I should have had it before me. I think literally teaching Vedic mantras and performing yajnas. Those are obviously Brahminical activities, and that gives up the game. You remove those activities, but you keep all the other attributes in the Brahminical column. Then over here, in the Shudra column, you remove, I think the phrase was service to others. Remove that singular, that one attribute out of that column of Shudras, and you leave all the other attributes of a Shudra. The two are completely indistinguishable. I've done this across half a dozen temples, not a dozen temples, half a dozen temples in dozens of lectures. Remove those two attributes from the column of a Brahmana, remove that singular attribute from the column of a Shudra. No one in the audience has ever been able to distinguish which column was describing a Brahmana and which column was describing a Shudra. The attributes were the same in terms of quality, character, and attributes of a Brahmana and a Shudra. The only thing that gives it away are the occupations. So the problem is we get lost in trying to understand Varnasrama. We get lost in trying to think of what's my occupation, what would I like to do? And that completely throws us off the trail. Forget about occupations. That's secondary. We'll come to occupations in a moment. What we have to look at when understanding Varnasrama is, let's go back to this circle of responsibility. And I'm actually going to use a different term because responsibility is misleading, right? Oftentimes we want responsibility because we like the power it gives and the credit we can receive, right? We like all the good things about responsibility. We want basically the credit and the power. We don't want the blame. When something goes wrong, we fob off the blame to others. I'm going to use the word blame just so that I have your attention. So we have this circle of blame. And I use this deliberately because it will get your attention. The circle of blame. Now remember, what's the purpose of Varnasrama? To achieve perfection. So a Shudra thinks, my God, if the people under my care, my dependents, if I'm responsible for making them or bringing them to the level of perfection, that's an enormous amount of work. I don't want to be blamed for them not achieving perfection. That's the mentality of a Shudra. A Shudra does not want to be blamed for others not achieving perfection. So the Shudra keeps their circle of blame extremely narrow. They're only interested, they'll take as much responsibility for basically themselves, and if they're married, their immediate family members. They do not want responsibility for anyone else. They'll take care of their husband, they'll take care of their wife, they'll take care of their 2 children, and they will work. And this is a Kshatriya. Sorry, not a Kshatriya. A Shudra as defined by Narad Muni. Remember, Shudras are actually highly qualified individuals. It's not about occupation. It's not about, their unsavory characters. Absolutely not. Highly qualified characters. The only issue is they are only interested, they recognize that they can only be responsible for themselves, and they do not want the blame for not elevating everybody else to perfection. They recognize that they're barely going to make themselves come up to the level of perfection, let alone anybody else. The circle expands and we come to a Vaishya. The Vaishya, and this is a natural mentality. The natural inclination, that's what Swabhava jump. This is a natural inclination. The natural inclination of a Kshatriya, that's a Vaishya, which is why they're called a Vaishya, is because that circle of responsibility or blame is expanded. A Vaishya is naturally inclined, wants the responsibility to lift a greater number of people to perfection. Not just themselves and their immediate family, but their extended family, their community, perhaps a region. And they do this by taking care of all aspects of what's needed in that community. Both the economic needs of that community, the physical needs of that community, and the spiritual needs of that community, because it's about perfection. Remember, right? Varnasrama is about perfection, Brahma Bhuta. So a Vaishya is interested in elevating their entire community to Brahma Bhuta. Shudras recognize, I'm barely making it there myself. I'm not going to take on the responsibility for doing it for anybody else. My husband and I, my wife and I have a hard enough time making it. That's the most we can do. The Vaishya is willing, wants to do more. The Kshatriya, it's even more expansive. And when it's more expansive, now the Kshatriya, when we hear qualities of a Kshatriya, who courage in battle, resourcefulness, determination, when you expand that circle of responsibility, one's ability also has to be greater. One's skills, one's determination, one's courage, one's ability to sacrifice also has to be greater. And the Kshatriya is also thinking, how can I bring not just myself, my immediate family, not just my community, my business, my region, but the entire nation to perfection, to Brahma Bhuta. Remember, we're talking about Varnasrama. We're talking about qualified Shudras, qualified Vaishyas, qualified Kshatriyas, and qualified Brahmanas, or persons who understand the purpose of Varnasrama, which is perfection. That's the purpose of Varnasrama. It's not, we cannot lose sight of that. That is the key issue here. We've gotten away from understanding and emphasizing that purpose. Now we come to the Brahmanas, and the Brahmins are all-encompassing. Everyone, everywhere, all living entities at all times. The Brahmins are interested in elevating all living entities. That's why Brahmins are always engaged in these 1,000-year yajnas, right? The Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas pay for these yajnas, but the Brahmins are engaged in these activities to uplift all of society, all of humanity, all creatures even, right? We hear when the Brahmins sacrifice an animal, it's to elevate the living entity. They sacrifice to the animal as a litmus test that what they're doing will elevate all living entities involved. That's a Brahmana. So now when we look at Varnashram through this lens, we understand now the purpose is not about comfort. Krishna says twice to Arjuna, follow your path, even if your path is full of faults. Follow your path no matter how hard it is, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how much you seem to be failing by the material standpoints. Follow your path. Rather than following an easier path that seems to provide much more material success. Don't do that. It's dangerous. It's not going to lead to perfection. Our path, our Varna, our natural swabhava, it's part of our nature because that's the journey we have to take to achieve Brahma Bhuta and Krishna Prema, speaking as a Vaishnava. So now with this understanding of the purpose of Varnashram and how to look at Varna not as an occupation, but in terms of responsibility, blame. Am I willing to shoulder the blame for not uplifting my family? Am I willing to shoulder the blame for not uplifting the world? If I don't want that blame, I'm not a Brahmin. Am I willing, eager, willing and ready to shoulder the blame of not uplifting a nation to the perfection of Brahma Bhuta? I'm not a Kshatriya. If I'm not willing to do that for my community, I'm not a Vaishya. That means I'm barely able or I'm ready to take on this responsibility for myself and my family, my immediate family. Heck, my pet cat for that matter. Now, when we look at Varnashram in that light, guess what? Occupation, understanding occupation becomes automatic. The purpose of Varnashram is to achieve Brahma Bhuta. Am I interested in lifting the entire world to Brahma Bhuta? If not, I don't take up an occupation of trying to uplift an entire world. I don't take up the occupation. It doesn't mean whether I take up doing a business or not. It means how do I go about a particular execution of that business. You can have a small business for oneself and one's family to make ends meet, but do I want to be the CEO of a multinational corporation? When I understand what the purpose of Varnashram is. Now we're Vaishnavas here. We're understanding the principles of Varnashram as defined by Krishna. The rest of the world is not engaged in trying to understand the principles of Varnashram or coming to the level of Brahma Bhuta. But that's the problem. That's the problem. So we have persons who have the ability to run a multinational corporation, but they're not interested whatsoever in elevating anyone to the level of Brahma Bhuta. So what do we have? We have what's called Varna Sankara. Oftentimes we think Varna Sankara is, and Prabhupada accurately, of course, translate Varna Sankara as unwanted children. But as we study Varnashram more extensively, we come to recognize that Varna Sankara is not just about unwanted children in the sense that there's no mother nor father or a broken family. Varna Sankara means progeny that is not progressing towards Brahma Bhuta, progeny that is not in a situation, that is not in an environment that conducive to their development to Brahmabhuta. That's Varna Shankara. In other words, a mom and a dad and two children who are not endeavoring towards Brahmabhuta, those two children are Varna Sankara. They're outside the system of Varnashram because the purpose of Varnashram is Brahmabhuta. So a family that is not working towards Brahmabhuta, whether it is a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, if they're not working towards Brahmabhuta, it's Varna Sankara. The progeny, the children of that family are Varna Sankara. They are not in the system of Varnashram, which will elevate them to Brahmabhuta. That's Varna Sankara. So taking all of this together, now we can look at our own lives and think, okay, the first thing we have to recognize is that being a Shudra is, in terms of attributes, character, and quality of personality, it's identical to being a Brahmana. That's the first thing we have to drill into our minds. The attributes of a Shudra, as defined by Narad Muni, are identical to the attributes of a Brahman. Now, of course, there are differences. The differences are the Shudra is more easily swayed by Tamaguna, whereas a Brahmana is not. But a Brahmana can be overcome by Rajaguna and Tamaguna. We've seen all throughout the stories of the Puranas, right? Brahmins making mistakes left and right. The only issue is that the Shudra is slightly more prone to that. The Shudra is slightly more prone, or is more prone, to being swept away by the modes of material nature, being swept away by the senses. That's all. That's a big difference. It's a major difference, for sure. But in terms of their attributes, their qualities, they're identical by the definition of Narad Muni, no less. So we get to see, first of all, that Shudras, we have to clarify this with our own minds, because the problem is we oh, I'm not a Shudra. We have this issue. Oh, I'm not a Shudra. I'm a Brahman. I'm a Shudra. I'm a Vaishya. No one wants to be a Shudra. When the fact of the matter is, Kalo Shudra Sambhava. That's the fact of the matter, right? The fact of the matter is, actually even worse than that. As I mentioned earlier in this session, if the world were run by Shudras, as Shudras are defined by Narad Muni, we would be living in heaven on earth today if the world was actually run by Shudras, as Narad Muni defines them. This would be heaven. So that's the first thing we have to clarify. Shudras are highly qualified individuals. And with that clarification, now we can actually see that there are occupations that fit that. There are occupations that allow us to engage in our nature, our proclivities, but then in relation to Varnashram, in relation to my responsibility to elevate others to Brahman, when we put those two together, do I want the responsibility? How much responsibility do I want in terms of elevating people to Brahman? Oh, good Lord in heaven, me and my wife, I have enough problems with that. That's a struggle. Elevating myself, my husband, my wife, my two children to the level of Brahman, that's, my hands are full. So now what occupation do I choose? I choose an occupation where I do not have the responsibility to bring people to the level of Brahma Bhuta. As Vaishnavas, this is how we have to think. This is how we have to understand Varnashram system as designed by Krishna, and what that means for our life. As Vaishnavas, what Krishna says, right? 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hridesha Rijuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rutani Maya. Krishna says, as the Supreme Lord, I am seated in everyone's heart, and I'm directing the wanderings of all living beings, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Krishna is speaking to us through the Varnashram system. Krishna is telling us what he expects of us in this life. If we understand the Varnashram system, as I've described it, if we understand and we get that, we can hear Krishna shouting at the top of his voice what we should be doing with our life. It's crystal clear when we understand Varnashram in that light. It certainly was for me when I was helped to understand Varnashram in this light. Our vision for our life, our purpose, our mission for this life becomes crystal clear when we understand Varnashram in this way. And for the devotee, Krishna has already said, I'm directing the wanderings of all living beings. Do you really think, Prabhupada said this, right? We have minute free will. You think you have free will? We do not have the free will we have is infinitesimal. The free will we have is to decide why we've chosen what we've chosen. The choice is made. There was a wonderful, and I have not been able to find it since. This was several years ago. And it caught me by surprise. I think it was on YouTube. I was scrolling through YouTube, researching something, looking up something, and there was a bit about free will. And it was a BBC presentation, BBC documentary. And this BBC journalist was going about, he was researching, talking about to philosophers, scientists about free will. He went to a university and they were talking about free will. And the professor said, well, I've got something I would like to show you. He sat the journalist down from the BBC, wired his brain up, sat him down in a chair, put him in front of a computer screen, and he tells the journalist, when you see something come up on the computer screen, there'll be a number of choices. Choose whichever one you want. And there were some pictures, and then there were some higher cognitive choices, like should you take a flight to Paris or should you take a train? What would be better? What would you prefer? So some higher cognitive questions for choices to be made, and like that. So the journalist, he sat there and he began to answer the questions and make his choices. Back up in the lab, of course, so the journalist is all wired. Back in the lab, in the observation place, the technician is there with the professor, and they're looking at a computer screen. And they see a couple of screens. They see the choice that comes up. So they see the choice that the journalist is looking at. And then the computer, does something, and you see like a waterfall display. I could not make heads or tails of it. And the professor says, oh, he chose pineapple. But you look in the laboratory, and the journalist is saying, do I like pineapple or bananas? But the computer is saying he's chosen pineapple. And then 2 seconds later, the journalist, okay, I'll take a pineapple. Then another question pops up on the screen. The same time that the journalist sees the question is higher cognitive, right? Should you take a plane to Paris or a train to Paris? Immediately, the computer says he's chosen taking a plane to Paris. But the journalist is sitting down in the lab thinking, if I take a plane on Thursday, it's quite crowded. If I take a train, and the journalist is going through all these permutations as what's the better choice? The choice is, he's already made the choice, right? His subconscious mind has already made the choice. He's chosen a plane. 7 seconds later, the journalist, I'll take a plane. And he clicks plane. And this was going back and forth. Every question that came up, the computer answered it within a moment. And it was interesting. It was more than 90% of the time. I took a note of it because my mind was blown. 90% of the time, the computer got it right, read his decision, his subconscious decision correctly. The only difference is how long it took for the bleeding journalist, forgive me, Father, how long it took for the journalist in the lab to consciously catch up to the decision he already made subconsciously. Would he catch up within a second, or would it take 8 seconds? I think the longest was like 7 or 8 seconds. That's how long it took for him to consciously choose, oh, I want the pineapple. But the computer had already predicted he chose the pineapple 8 seconds ago. And the computer did this with 90% accuracy. So they they unplugged the journalists, and the professor went through the results. If you find the link, please let me know. Put it in the comments here on YouTube, because we should all see it. It was a BBC documentary on free will. The journalist was so shocked. He came out of the college campus and he was sitting on the steps of the college campus with his head in his hand because he was blown. He thought that I was blown watching this. We'd all read the Bhagavad Gita, right? 327. Prakriti Kriyamanani, right? The living entity, bewildered by false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the modes of material nature. For crying out loud, we've all learned that verse when we were 7 years old in Gurukul, right? We all know the verse. But when you see it in such, you see the empirical evidence of that verse, it was mind-blowing. I say all that to say this. Krishna knows our path. The script of our life is already written. The choices we are going to make are already made. We don't even know we've made them, and we have made them. Our subconscious mind has made them. Our minute independence comes in how we choose to understand why those choices have been made. Why those subconsciously we've made those choices. Because that's the only thing we can do that animals cannot. Animals cannot go over the choices they made and explore why our subconscious mind has made that choice, or why, as devotees, we are on this path that Krishna is directing. And of course, don't bring up, well, Mahavishnu, Krishna says he's the witness. Yes, Krishna is the witness, he does not influence. But no, he does influence. Both are correct. Krishna does not influence in terms of he's allowing the modes of material nature, and he's allowing the living entity to desire whatever the living entity wants to desire. After that desire happens, the modes of material nature and Krishna's will, Krishna's sanction is all involved. The living entity can desire whatever. That's perfectly fine. But if we go to chapter 9, text, let's say 27, 28, somewhere in there, 29. Samaham sarva bhuteshu name dveshosti na priya. Ye bhajanti tamam bhaktya. Bhaktya. Mayite teshu chapyaham. Krishna says, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. That's this Krishna's being the witness, right? I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. But he or she who renders service unto me is a friend, is in me, and I'm also a friend to him. As devotees, as Vaishnava, Krishna is intimately involved in our path, in what we're to be doing in this life. Krishna says to Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. Krishna is intimately involved in our path in life. Krishna says, I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. Krishna is intimately involved in the Vaishnava's life. In the purport to that verse, chapter 9, 28, 29, Samaham Sarva Bhuteshu, Prabhupada clarifies, Prabhupada says, clear as day, for the devotee, Krishna is all over the devotee's life. For the devotee who is, it's natural. Prabhupada gives the example of a person who is equally disposed towards all people, gives in charity to everyone. But for those who are interested in the relationship with that person, obviously there's going to be a special relationship. We have been chanting japa every day for 40 odd years. Krishna is intimately involved in where our life is going. The problem is we're not hearing it. In order to hear what Krishna is saying, in order to hear what Krishna is telling us is our mission in this life, our purpose, the path we should be following, we have to understand Varnasrama. Krishna talks to us through Varnasrama. And he's shouting from the rooftops, Mahavishnu, you bloody idiot. This is what you should be doing. When I, as the minute living entity that has minute independence, I like the example of the script. The script is written. We're on stage. The script is written by Krishna. There is no deviating from the script. The minute independence I have is whether or not I will give my all the talent I have, or lack of talent, all of myself into reading and acting the script that has been given to me by Krishna. Or because I don't like the character that I'm supposed to be playing, I go out on stage and I just mumble the lines. I'm going to speak the lines, right? The subconscious, the choice is already there. The script is already written. For the devotees, Krishna is already intimately involved in our life. The minute independence is, it's the same minute independence Arjuna had. Krishna says, I've already written the story of the Battle of Kurukshetra. The only question is, how much of an instrument are you going to be? This is going to happen. This drama, this play, this script is going to happen. The only question is, how are you going to enact it? That's the minute independence. And Varnasrama is Krishna shouting at us, telling us what he expects us to do in this life, in his service. Mahavishnu, you're a Shudra, you're a Vaishya, you're a Kshatriya, you're a Brahmana, whatever. Mahavishnu, this is what I want you to, this is your natural inclination, your swabhavajam. Your duty is to elevate yourself and your pet cat to Brahma Bhuta. Mahavishnu, you're a Shudra. Concentrate on that. Do that. Elevate yourself and your pet cat to Brahma Bhuta. That's how we understand Varnasrama and apply Varnasrama to our life. So let's recap very briefly. The purpose of Varnasrama has nothing to do with whether or not we are comfortable, whether or not we are happy, whether or not we are satisfied in our occupation. Has nothing to do with that. Krishna says happiness and distress are like winter and summer. They're going to come whether you like it or not. Be done with being concerned about it. Come to Brahma Bhuta. Krishna says, stick to your path. Even if your path is full of fault, stick to it. Even if another path is more rosy, brings more material success, seems to be more fun, more exciting, stick to your path, even if it destroys you, because actually, in actuality, that easier path is dangerous. It's going to take you off course. Stick to your Varna. The purpose of Varnasrama is to elevate yourself and anyone else as your dependent to Brahma Bhuta. You have a capacity, I've given you Mahavishnu, to the capacity to elevate yourself and your pet cat. Stick to that, do that, you will be a successful person. And then, whatever occupation it takes to do that, that's the occupation you have. In order for me and my pet cat to go back home, back to Godhead, I just need basically a living wage job, right? Get a job as a teacher somewhere, teaching, some or something I like to do, Uber, some job that pays the bills, so that I'm not in destitute, so that my cat is also not in destitute, and I can feed my cat leftover prasadam. I don't need to become a PhD in a brain surgeon. Not to say that a brain surgeon, PhD in a brain surgeon, you can have a PhD in a brain surgeon who is a Sudra, a Vaishya, a Kshatriya, or Brahmana, right? It doesn't matter if you are 5 PhDs, you are 4-star general and the supreme allied commander of NATO, and you're the owner of a Fortune 500 company. You can have all those titles and still be a Shudra. Remember, it's not about occupation. It's not about occupation as such. And that's the key. So we'll end there. And on Thursday, we will go back to, or we will have our reading from Srila Prabhupada on Gurukul. I think last Thursday, rather, we went over the foreword by Satchit Maharaj. So now we'll get into the book itself, Srila Prabhupada and Gurukul. That's Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hare Krishna.